My name is Vivian Foster, 32 years old, and I never imagined my $780,000 relocation bonus would end up funding my sister-in-law Penelope's beach house. When my mother-in-law Margaret called me, laughing, practically singing, about how she'd redirected my money, she thought I was powerless to stop her. What she never expected was that my calm reply would set off a corporate investigation that would wipe the smug smile clean off her face. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws, you already know. Some family members don't need a villain origin story. They just need a checkbook that isn't theirs. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Bristol, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. My parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity before I could even spell either word. Our home was small but stitched together with love. We didn't have much, but my parents made sure I had chances they never got, especially when it came to education. That's the quiet, unglamorous magic of working-class parents. They hand you doors they were never allowed to open themselves. My love for computer engineering started in high school, in a stuffy classroom with a stubborn old desktop that crashed every 10 minutes. Something about logic, patterns, and problem-solving just clicked. I worked part-time jobs through school and was thrilled to earn a partial scholarship to the University of Bristol. Even then, I took out loans and worked through college. Those years taught me resilience, and the very particular satisfaction of earning something with your own two tired hands. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-sized tech company. The pay was modest, but I was eager to prove myself. That's where I met Nathaniel Bennett, a marketing executive who joined around the same time. We bonded over being the new kids lost in corporate hallways, both pretending we understood what synergy meant in meetings. After 2 years of dating, we married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. That's also when I met Margaret Bennett, my mother-in-law, for the first time. She arrived at our engagement party in an outfit that cost more than my monthly rent and immediately began critiquing everything: the venue, the flowers, my ring. She dominated every conversation, dropping references to the family's wealth like breadcrumbs she expected us to follow and admire. Nathaniel had warned me his mother could be difficult. Difficult, it turned out, was a generous word. Margaret came from old money and had never worked a single day in her life. She'd married into even more of it when she wed Edmund Bennett, owner of a chain of luxury car dealerships. Their daughter, Penelope, was clearly the golden child, while Nathaniel existed somewhere in the family shadows despite building an actual career with his actual hands. The class gap between our families showed up in every visit. Margaret once asked, with a perfectly straight face, whether I planned to quit my job after the wedding. "Since surely Nathaniel can support you." As if my career were a hobby I'd grow out of, like collecting stickers. I told her, politely but firmly, that I loved my work and had no plans to give it up. She looked at me like I'd insulted the family crest. Penelope, my sister-in-law, was cut from the same expensive cloth. She'd bounced between 3 colleges without finishing a single degree, and now lived off a trust fund while calling herself an influencer and lifestyle consultant. Her Instagram was a highlight reel of borrowed luxury. Luxury her parents funded down to the last filtered sunset. At 30 years old, she had never once supported herself. Nathaniel's relationship with his family was complicated in the way that only families with money can be complicated. Plenty of love, buried under decades of expectation. He'd built his career without leaning on his father's connections and chosen a modest lifestyle despite having easy access to family money. It's one of the things I admired most about him. It also drove Margaret up the wall because to her, his independence looked like rejection. Our first 2 years of marriage were mostly peaceful. We lived in Bristol, comfortably far from Edinburgh, where the Bennetts lived, so we only saw them on major holidays. Nathaniel ran interference during those visits, steering conversations away whenever his mother aimed for a low blow. We were building careers, building a life, and despite the occasional family theatrics, we were genuinely happy. Then Everbright Technologies came calling. They were one of the leading software companies in the country, and they'd taken serious notice of a machine learning algorithm I'd developed. They offered me a senior position on their advanced research team. A dream job with one catch. It required relocating to their headquarters in Nashville. Nathaniel and I spent weeks weighing it. Leaving friends, restarting his career, uprooting an entire life, it was a lot. But the role offered creative freedom, serious research resources, and a substantial pay bump. After careful thought, Nathaniel encouraged me to take it. "We'll make it work," he said, and I believed him. What sealed the deal was the relocation package. $780,000 to cover moving costs, Nashville's pricier housing market, and support for Nathaniel's career transition. It was an enormous, almost unbelievable number, proof of how much the company valued what I could bring to the table. When I called my parents, they cried happy tears and started planning their first visit to Nashville before I'd even hung up. Unfortunately, word of my success, and that eye-watering relocation number, somehow reached Margaret. I still don't know exactly how. My money's on Nathaniel mentioning it during a phone call, innocently, the way you'd mention good news to someone you assume is happy for you. The storm clouds were gathering. I had no idea just how destructive they'd become. The trouble started right after I signed the contract. Nathaniel and I were deep into planning our move, researching neighborhoods, school districts, the best barbecue joints, the usual Nashville homework, when Margaret insisted we come to Edinburgh to share the news in person. Nathaniel thought it was a peace offering, maybe even his mother finally softening. I was skeptical. I agreed anyway because that's what you do when you're still hoping the in-law horror stories don't apply to you. From the moment we arrived at their sprawling estate, the air felt tight like a held breath. Margaret had organized a dinner party without telling us, and invited family friends we'd never met. All evening she introduced me as my daughter-in-law who works with computers, which is a bit like introducing a heart surgeon as someone who's handy with tools. Meanwhile, she gushed at length about Penelope's supposed new skincare line, a business that appeared to exist entirely within the borders of Instagram. Over dinner, Margaret asked about our relocation plans in front of everyone. When Nathaniel mentioned Everbright's generous package, I watched something flicker across her face. Jealousy, calculation, maybe both. She pressed for specifics. How much, when it would land, how it would be split. Nathaniel, proud of me and a little too trusting of his own mother, shared more than I would have liked, including the fact that the funds would hit our joint account the following week, right before our move. The night ended with a toast that felt more like a slap disguised as a compliment. Margaret raised her glass and said, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, that companies these days were so generous with certain hires, weren't they? Since women in tech were still so rare. The table went painfully quiet. Nathaniel squeezed my hand under the table and changed the subject fast, but the damage was already sitting in my stomach like a stone. Later in the guest room, I told Nathaniel something felt off about his mother's sudden interest in our finances. He assured me I was overreacting, that she was just showing interest in her own clumsy, tone-deaf way. I wanted to believe him. The knot in my stomach disagreed. The next morning, I overheard Margaret and Penelope in the garden, their voices drifting through an open window. "Do you know how much money they're getting just to move?" Margaret said. $780,000, for a glorified IT job. Meanwhile, you can't even afford the down payment on that beach house in Cornwall. Penelope's reply was sharper. "It's so unfair. Nathaniel married beneath him and gets rewarded, and I do everything right and get nothing." I walked away before I heard more. I didn't tell Nathaniel. In hindsight, that silence was my first mistake. The educational lesson here being that when you overhear your in-laws plotting in a garden like storybook villains, you tell your spouse immediately, no matter how badly you want to keep the peace. The week after we got home was a blur of packing, wrapping up projects, and Nathaniel interviewing for Nashville positions. Everbright confirmed the funds would land Monday, giving us 2 weeks to finalize everything. And they did land, right on schedule, a wave of relief washing over both of us as we watched the balance update. That relief lasted exactly 1 workday. When I logged into our account that evening, my blood ran cold. The entire $780,000 had been transferred out earlier that day, to an account neither of us recognized. Called Nathaniel immediately. He was as stunned as I was. He hadn't authorized anything. We called the bank in a panic and learned the transfer had gone through using Nathaniel's own credentials, from a device the bank recognized. While we were still reeling, my phone rang. Margaret. I put her on speaker so Nathaniel could hear everything. Vivian, darling, she began, voice dripping with false sweetness. I just wanted to thank you for your generosity. Penelope's made an offer on that beach house in Cornwall, and your relocation money made it possible. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. What are you talking about? Her tone shifted instantly, all pretense gone. Oh, please. That money was wasted on you anyway. You don't deserve it. Madison, sorry Penelope, has been dreaming of that property for years. Consider it family helping family. Nathaniel would agree if he weren't so blinded by whatever spell you've cast on him. Nathaniel grabbed the phone, pale with shock. Mother, what have you done? Now, don't be dramatic, dear. I simply used the banking details you left on your old laptop last visit. You really should be more careful with your passwords. She laughed, a cold, satisfied little sound. The money's already in the seller's escrow account. The deal closes tomorrow. There's nothing you can do about it. Felt physically ill. That money wasn't a windfall to be casually redirected. It was meant to support us through the move, cover Nathaniel's job gap, absorb Nashville's cost of living. Without it, the dream job I'd worked a decade toward could evaporate before it even started. My hands were shaking, but somehow my voice came out steady. Thanks for letting me know, I said quietly. Margaret actually paused, caught off guard. Well, I'm glad you're being reasonable. Perhaps you're smarter than I gave you credit for. I hung up without another word, then turned to Nathaniel. I need to call Everbright. Then I'm calling the police. The next hours were frantic. Nathaniel paced the apartment, cycling between apologies and furious calls to his father, Edmund, who claimed complete ignorance. Whether that was true or convenient amnesia, I couldn't tell, but his stammering suggested at least some genuine surprise. My first call was to Georgina Hale, my contact at Everbright. I explained everything, emphasizing that the funds had been stolen through unauthorized account access. To my relief, she was sympathetic but clearly alarmed. Vivian, this is incredibly serious. I need to loop in our finance and legal teams immediately. This money was earmarked specifically for your relocation. We'll need to investigate. The police, unfortunately, were far less helpful. Since Margaret had used Nathaniel's own credentials and the money went to a family member, they filed it as a civil matter rather than theft, and suggested we consult an attorney, in a tone that made it clear they thought this was just an overdramatic family squabble. They had no idea what was actually at stake. My career, our future, and a betrayal that cut all the way to the bone. We didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., Nathaniel kept repeating that he should have logged out of the laptop, should have seen his mother's sudden financial interest for what it was. I didn't blame him. His own mother had betrayed him just as thoroughly as she'd betrayed me. We still have savings, he said, voice hoarse. We could use that, find somewhere smaller in Nashville temporarily. But we both knew our savings wouldn't come close to covering deposits, moving costs, and the gap before his new paycheck started. The next day we met with Beatrice Langley, a lawyer specializing in financial crimes. She listened, expression growing graver by the sentence. So your mother-in-law accessed your account without permission, transferred a company-provided relocation bonus to purchase property for your sister-in-law, and openly admitted to it on the phone? When we confirmed, she leaned forward. That's not a family dispute. That's wire fraud, identity theft, and possibly corporate fund misappropriation, which could implicate both of you if Everbright decides you were complicit. That last part hit like a bucket of cold water. I hadn't even considered the company might suspect us. Beatrice advised us to document everything and prepare for a fight on two fronts, recovering the money and protecting ourselves from suspicion. As we left her office, Georgina called with an update that made my stomach drop further. Everbright's financial compliance team was launching a formal investigation, one that would include sending investigators to interview Margaret directly. I never wanted this to get so formal, I told Nathaniel in the car. I just wanted our money back. His knuckles were white on the wheel. Maybe it's time she faced real consequences for once in her life. The stress took a physical toll fast. Insomnia, no appetite, the works. Nathaniel swung between silence and bursts of anger at his family. He tried calling Penelope, hoping to appeal to whatever conscience she had left. She wouldn't even pick up. The hardest part was watching our carefully built plans collapse in real time. We'd already given notice at our jobs and our apartment. Friends had thrown us a going-away party. My parents had booked flights to Nashville. Now everything sat frozen, boxes half-packed around us like a museum exhibit of a future that might not happen. I sat on the floor of our apartment one evening and just cried. Not delicate tears, the ugly, furious kind. Years of proving myself in a male-dominated field. And one calculated move by a woman who couldn't stand watching her son's wife succeed had nearly wrecked it all. A week after the theft, Everbright's investigation team requested a meeting. 2 corporate investigators coming to our apartment before flying to Edinburgh to confront Margaret. Maybe this is it, Nathaniel said, allowing himself real hope for the first time. I wanted to believe him, but Margaret had spent a lifetime dodging consequences through charm and money. Would this actually be different? That night she called again. Nathaniel put her on speaker without warning her. "Darling, I hope you've calmed down about the money situation," she began breezily. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think this is all for the best. Penelope's beach house will be a family asset. You two can use it sometimes if you ask nicely." Nathaniel's voice went ice cold. "Did you know Everbright is sending investigators to talk to you, Mother? They're treating this as corporate fund misappropriation. Do you understand what that means?" Then a nervous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. This is a family matter. No company involves itself in a private financial decision." "It wasn't private," Nathaniel shot back. "You stole money allocated for Vivian's job relocation. The company has every right to investigate." "Well," she huffed, "I'll simply explain you both changed your minds and gifted the money to Penelope. It's your word against mine. Except," I cut in, unable to stay quiet, "for the fact that you literally called to brag about stealing it. And I recorded that call." Total bluff. We hadn't recorded anything. But Margaret had no way of knowing that, and her sharp intake of breath told me the thought had genuinely never crossed her mind. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "Try me," I said, surprising myself with how steady it came out. She hung up. Nathaniel and I looked at each other. The first real spark of triumph in weeks. Small but real. For the first time, Margaret sounded rattled. The investigators, Frederick Owen and Rosalind Clark, arrived precisely at 9 the next morning with the calm, thorough energy of people used to unearthing uncomfortable truths. For nearly 3 hours we walked them through everything. The job offer, the funds landing, the theft, Margaret's confession call, the text messages, all of it. Rosalind asked pointed questions to rule out other explanations. Gambling debts, money troubles, any reason we might have willingly handed the funds over. It stung, but I understood they had to eliminate every possibility before believing the obvious one. Frederick was especially interested in the confession call. "You say she called specifically to tell you she'd taken the money?" We confirmed it, and I pulled up a text Margaret had sent afterward. "The beach house closing went smoothly. Penelope is ecstatic. You two will thank me someday for keeping the money in the family where it belongs." My reply had been blunt. "What you did is theft. This isn't over." Her response: "Don't be dramatic. No one will believe you anyway." "This is helpful," Rosalind said, "but we'll need more to build a solid case." They flew to Edinburgh the next day to interview Margaret directly, armed with bank statements, the messages, and a very clear picture of unauthorized access under federal law. That evening brought a flood of texts from Penelope, escalating fast. "Why are you doing this to Mom? She was just trying to help me. Then you're both so selfish." Then finally, a threat dressed up as concern. "Mom is freaking out about some corporate investigation. This is going too far. Call it off or you'll regret it." Nathaniel's reply was short. "Return the money and this ends immediately." Her answer landed like a punch. The house closing had already finished. There was nothing to return. Despair crept back in. If the money was already spent, how could we possibly recover it in time? But that night Edmund called. His usually booming voice strained. "Your mother told me about some misunderstanding." He started carefully. Nathaniel's laugh had zero humor in it. "A misunderstanding. She committed identity theft and wire fraud, Dad. She stole $780,000 meant for our future." Long pause. "These investigators. How serious is this?" "Very," Nathaniel said. "They could pursue criminal charges." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll talk to your mother," Edmund finally said. "And Penelope. This may have gone too far." For the first time, it seemed the family's precious reputation, the thing they cared about most, was finally working in our favor. The next call came from Frederick himself. Their forensic team had traced the funds directly from our account into an escrow account for a Cornwall property purchase, buyer listed as Penelope Bennett. "Concrete proof. What are the chances we recover the funds?" "Yes. That depends on how cooperative Mrs. Bennett is today," Rosalind said. "But Everbright is prepared to pursue this aggressively." Hours crawled by. We packed anyway, refusing to fully give up hope. Finally, just after 6 that evening, Frederick called with news. Margaret had initially insisted the money was a gift. But faced with the evidence, the unauthorized access, the incriminating texts, and the very real threat of criminal charges for wire fraud, her tune changed fast. "Mrs. Bennett has agreed to return the full $780,000 to Everbright within 24 hours, Rosalind confirmed. "The company will then release the funds to you as originally intended." I couldn't speak. Nathaniel asked how this was even possible if the house had already closed. Turns out it hadn't. The funds were in escrow, but the final paperwork hadn't processed. Margaret could cancel the purchase and pull the money back. The real estate company confirmed it. And Everbright made it very clear. If the funds weren't returned by the deadline, they'd file formal charges and pursue maximum penalties. Given the stakes to her freedom and the family's precious reputation, the investigators believed she'd comply. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. But at exactly 5 p.m. the following day, an email arrived. Funds recovered. Margaret had returned every dollar. I called Nathaniel in happy tears. When I finished reading it to him, he went quiet, then said, "I need to call my father." While he did, my phone rang with an unknown number. A reporter named Priscilla Wren from a Boston-adjacent paper, asking for comment on Margaret Bennett's attempted misappropriation of corporate funds. Word had leaked, probably from someone at the real estate firm when the sale suddenly collapsed. I declined comment and called Everbright immediately, who confirmed they hadn't sought this publicity, but wouldn't deny it either since it was all documented fact. 2 days later, Margaret texted me directly for the first time since her gloating call. "I hope you're satisfied with the damage you've caused this family. Our reputation is in tatters because you couldn't handle a simple family arrangement." Nathaniel shook his head reading it. Even now, she's the victim in her own story. I wrote back simply, "You stole $780,000 that was meant for our future. You accessed our account without permission. These are the natural consequences of your actions, not our revenge. I hope someday you understand the difference." She never replied. The day before our move, Edmund visited unannounced. He looked older, the confidence I remembered replaced by a tired slump. "I want to apologize," he said, looking at me directly for maybe the first time ever. "What Margaret did was wrong. I should have taken it seriously from the start instead of calling it a family disagreement." He explained he and Margaret had started counseling and handed us an envelope before he left, a personal gift of $25,000, completely separate from the company funds, he clarified. Far less than what Margaret had tried to steal, but it meant something as a first real gesture. We boarded our flight to Nashville the next morning, relief and hope tangled together. "Margaret thought she was punishing you for daring to succeed on your own terms," Nathaniel said as the plane climbed. Instead, she gave you the perfect stage to prove exactly how formidable you are. Nashville turned into a genuine fresh start. My first day at Everbright exceeded every expectation. A tour of the research campus, a warm welcome from teammates, and a project with real healthcare applications. To my surprise, plenty of people at the company already knew something about the situation, and instead of awkwardness, I got respect. During lunch with Victoria Sinclair, the CTO, she told me plainly, "How we handle challenges reveals far more about character than any interview ever could. We've got our eye on you for leadership." It was the first sign that surviving Margaret's chaos had actually built my reputation rather than damaged it. Proof that grace under pressure is its own kind of qualification, one no resume can fake. Nathaniel landed a role at a marketing firm specializing in tech clients, thriving entirely on his own merit. Our new home slowly filled in around us. Furniture, laughter, favorite restaurants discovered on lazy weekends. 3 months in, my parents visited, and watching my dad get emotional over a demo of my algorithm was worth every sleepless night from the fight before. "This is why we sacrificed," he told me. "Not for recognition. So you could do work that makes you happy." 6 months later, our algorithm hit a breakthrough in early disease detection. I led the stakeholder presentation myself, and afterward, Georgina pulled me aside. A director position was opening, and my name was at the top of the list. Standing in a room full of industry leaders, explaining technology that could genuinely save lives, felt like the exact opposite of everything Margaret had once implied about my glorified IT job. Communication with the Bennetts stayed complicated but slowly thawed. Edmund called regularly, asking real questions, showing real interest. Margaret stayed mostly silent, occasionally polite but distant. 2 years after the theft, she finally emailed me directly. "I've been working with my therapist to understand the harm I caused, particularly to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I recognize the wrong I did." Not a perfect apology, but real progress from a woman who once couldn't admit fault about anything, ever. I wrote back, not absolution but acknowledgement, and the door left open carefully for something healthier down the line. 3 years after the move, I gave a keynote at a Women in Technology conference, telling this whole ridiculous, painful, ultimately triumphant story to a room of engineers and executives. Afterward, a young engineer approached with tears in her eyes. Her father-in-law constantly told her husband she was wasting her education. Hearing how I'd stood my ground gave her the courage to do the same. Looking back now, the lesson is almost embarrassingly simple, the kind of thing your grandmother could have told you for free. Money stolen can be recovered with the right evidence, the right lawyer, and the nerve to bluff about a recording you never made. But the real wealth in all of this was never the $780,000. It was learning the hard way that standing your ground isn't just about winning back a bank transfer. It's about refusing to let anyone, family included, decide what you deserve. If you're facing your own battle with a toxic relative or someone determined to shrink you down to fit their comfort, remember that sometimes the people trying hardest to dim your light are simply terrified of how brightly you're about to shine.